Whew. Another beautiful summer day. What's that? It's from Bob. Okay, let's give it a read. Dear Mike, started my vacation. Will be out of town until the winds are right. Do yourself a favor and get outside more. Cordially yours, Bob. Get outside more? When I said it was a beautiful summer day, I meant that it was a beautiful summer day to stay inside and play video games. Alright, fine. Oh. New record. Well, good enough. All of this talk of summer is bringing back memories of one particular gaming experience. I remember renting this game from Blockbuster, thought it was great, always wanted to play it again. Long time later, the chance finally presented itself. It was on sale at a local game shop. Only problem, we were on a family vacation at the time, so when we bought it, I didn't have the console in question to play it. I had to stare at this game cartridge for like 2 weeks until we got home. What game was that? Kirby 64. Kirby has always been one of my favorite Nintendo franchises. Kirby 64 was one of the only Kirby games I owned for the longest time. The only other one I had was Kirby's Air Ride for the GameCube, which is like a kart racer spinoff. After that was released, Kirby pretty much left consoles behind, and all the main games were coming out on portable. I never had a Game Boy or a Game Boy Advance growing up. I did have a Nintendo DS, but not until pretty late in the lifespan, and got a 3DS afterward, so I missed most of the Kirby games when they were new. Kirby came back to console though finally 11 years after Kirby 64 with Kirby's Return to Dreamland. That was the next console game that offered the same kind of traditional gameplay the franchise is known so well for. And because of that big gap, that's why Kirby 64 is so nostalgic to me, because I've played it end to end so many times, because it was the only way I could really enjoy the franchise. It makes me all the more excited to get back into it today, now that I've played pretty much every Kirby game out there since the last time I played Kirby 64. So let's see how it holds up and how it compares. As an added bonus, I've also got my Rumble Pack. I recently acquired this. I talked about it briefly in my Star Fox episode. So looking forward to having a chance to use it again, since Kirby 64 is one of the supported titles. Chance to enjoy an old game with some new flavor. Well, if we got all the background out of the way, it's time to get started with Kirby. Everything ready to go here. Oh, I almost forgot. This is one of the N64 games that doesn't use the analog stick at all, just the D-pad. So you hold the controller like so. Let's get going. The Kirby games haven't changed much across the different console generations. They're all pretty much the same idea. They're platformers. You move Kirby around left to right, and his principal ability is the ability to inhale opponents and steal their powers for himself. It's called the copy ability. Every main Kirby game has this feature. Kirby 64, though, takes it in a new direction. You now have the ability to combine copy abilities. So combine fire with the bomb ability to make fireworks, stuff like that. There are 28 unique abilities you can craft from this mix and match component. This was never used ever again, to my knowledge at least, in the Kirby franchise, which is kind of a shame. But it is very cool. It makes the game very unique compared to many of the other entries in the series because of this. Let's dig into the story now. This game has a lot of cutscenes, at least in the beginning, and then they kind of taper off, but they come back again toward the end. And I always really liked that about this game when I was a kid. It was always fun to see the little movies play out with these characters. So let's check out the story mode. What are we dealing with here? We open up on a totally probable planet that definitely exists somewhere. with some peaceful fairy folk. Their planet gets invaded by some kind of evil parasitic thing that wants to take their crystal. Or destroy it? I'm really not sure. It seems like they want to destroy it at first, given this opening cutscene, but later in the game, these creatures act like they want the crystal pieces, so I have no idea what to make of this cutscene. And what doesn't help is that there's no dialogue and there's no text on screen, and that goes for any cutscene in the game. I suppose if you had the manual that would help, but for N64 games, I only have like one game that has a manual still from when I was a kid, mainly because the vast majority of N64 games I own were bought pre-owned in some form. So I'm kind of lost here with this one. But this made me realize something interesting. Going back to the no dialogue and no text thing, all the cutscenes have their audio, whether it's effects or just music, comprised of, well, effects and music. It's really unique. Kind of interesting that the cutscenes don't have any kind of dialogue. Characters will like speak and say things to each other on screen, but there's no words. Rather, it's like little musical effects. I think it's kind of charming. It's definitely unique. The Kirby games, Kirby himself like never has dialogue. The few games that had dialogue that I can think of, it was primarily narration. But there is usually at least text. Kirby Superstar famously has a lot of dialogue in the Meta Knight chapter. So it's interesting for them not to do text again in some form and rather do this kind of like cutesy little cartoon, musically oriented cutscene style. And if you go into the sound test in the options, the cutscenes are the last chunk of soundtracks. You're just listening to the cutscene, which is really weird that they'd include that, because you can watch the cutscenes separately if you want to. So it's an interesting way to do it, and I think it works really well for the Kirby aesthetic, definitely. Getting back to the story, it's up to Kirby and friends to collect all the Crystal Shards to rebuild the large crystal featured in the opening of the game. Every level has 3 Crystal Shards in it, plus 1 that gets rewarded at the end of each world in the form of a boss fight. So, pretty straightforward, although the Crystal Shards themselves aren't always easy to find. The first world pretty much hands you each one. There's a couple that are hidden off screen, but it gets far more complicated as the game continues. Every world will end in a boss fight. When you defeat the boss, you're able to proceed to the next world. So it's pretty straightforward. It's a linear platformer. You're able to get through the levels no matter how many Crystal Shards you collect. Collecting all of them, however, is required to get the best ending to the game. Before we go any further, I want to go ahead and just make sure I announce it so that you're like not confused, like, whoa, what's going on? I'm going to change from the N64 version to the Wii Virtual Console version. The main reason being the video quality. N64, like, I'm not playing this on an emulator on PC. I'm using the actual game consoles. So N64 video quality, just going through this capture system, doesn't hold up all that well for the capture card I got. So we're going to go to the Wii Virtual Console version because the Wii's going to output component. It's going to look a lot crisper, cleaner, no fuzz. So give you guys something better to look at. I just want to make sure I announce that before people were like, what happened to the quality? It just like drastically improved. So let's continue our journey. Now, this brings us to one point about the game that I don't like. After playing the other games in the franchise, this game comes across as really simple with its copy abilities, which is ironic because it's the only game that allows you to actually combine them. But the issue is that most copy abilities only have one move that you use, regardless of it being a single or a combo move. Compare that to Kirby Superstar, where every copy ability has a move set, which gives a lot more value out of them. It makes it feel like you're really playing a different role when you have one versus another. In Kirby 64, not only does Kirby's appearance not change with the copy abilities, or at the very minimum give him like one of the little hats he usually has, but they're all just really simple. It kind of feels shallow almost, which is a bummer because there's a lot of potential with this mix and match system. What it really results is there's a handful of abilities that are genuinely fun to use, like the flaming sword, the bow and arrow, the friggin' lightsaber, but if you want to get 100%, you can't stick to using a single copy ability. You have to change to uncover the secret areas where some of the crystal shards are held, which they're usually held behind barriers that can only be broken by specific combinations of copy abilities. So it's kind of a bummer that they didn't all have full little movesets. Even if they were really simple movesets, like maybe 3 abilities, that still would have been enough to make each one feel truly unique from another beyond just having an action result. Because with them only having a single action each, it means that you get it, you play with it for 10 seconds, and you're like, all right, I've seen it, and then you get rid of it. And that's kind of a shame. And maybe that's why they never use it again, because it would be a lot of work to craft a full moveset out of these 28-something unique combinations. It could be done. Kirby Superstar had north of 20-something copy abilities, but granted you couldn't combine them. But I feel like they could have done it, because Kirby 64 only has the really basic set of copy abilities, whereas Kirby Superstar and the future games have a larger pool of what are considered basic abilities. So, kind of a bummer in retrospect. The game is still fun. I feel like it makes up for this with its level design. The levels are fun, and the music is great. I do like the soundtrack. A lot of the tunes are really, really catchy. They really stick with you. The levels are pretty. They're fun to get through. It never feels mundane. So it isn't a total detraction. It's just a disappointment when you compare it to what came before and obviously what came after. Let's get into the levels, though. Let's talk about those in more detail. Going into the level design, the game takes you through 6 worlds, 4 stages each, plus a boss fight. The worlds go Popstar, Rockstar, Aquastar, Neostar, Shiverstar, and the final level, Ripple Star. Each one, more or less, has like a consistent theme. Rockstar is like mostly desert themed, Aquastar is water themed, you kind of get the picture. The cool thing though is, it doesn't like totally commit to the cliche of having a theme for every single stage. They kind of change. For example, Rockstar starts off what seems to be a typical kind of desert environment, but then the second stage changes it up and you're in this kind of like plains, countryside, temple area, and then you go to this underground, underwater cavern, and then you go into a UFO that's parked in the desert. Every level's kind of like that. It kind of changes the further in you get. One of my favorites as a kid was Neostar. It starts off as a jungle, then it kind of transitions to caves and a mountain system, then it ends with you going into a volcano. One that always stuck with me from when I was a kid was a level in Shiverstar. Shiverstar starts off as an ice level, then it transitions to being up in the clouds, then you go into like a mini mall, a department store type thing. It's weird, and then it goes into this factory. This factory level is probably the most iconic level from this game. The soundtrack, I've heard it remixed like a dozen times across a bunch of fan-made stuff. It's definitely one that like sticks with the fans. But this factory level is like creepy. The soundtrack really gives it this atmosphere of just weird intimidation. There's a section that I always struggled with as a kid where King Dedede jumps in to assist you. You control him now, and you have to get through these sections where these hammers crush down. As a kid, I always struggled to get through this. As an adult, and because I am in fact the best, I didn't have any trouble with it now, but it's a very nostalgic level to me. I definitely enjoyed going through it again here. Now, what is a Nintendo game without its boss fights? Like I've said a couple times now, every world ends with a boss encounter. Let's go through them. The first thing I'll say right off the bat is that none of the boss fights are particularly difficult. That isn't a bad thing because they are situationally difficult. If you go into a boss fight with the right copy ability, you can completely destroy the boss with minimal effort. If you were to go in with no copy ability, that's like playing the game on hard mode, because you have to rely on the projectiles that the boss spawns with its attacks to then retaliate and do damage. And those kind of attacks that you do don't do much. That isn't usually ever a problem, though. You can always go into a fight with whatever copy ability you want, since you can freely exit worlds, enter levels, just to get a good combo ability, exit back out, and go into a boss fight. So you can basically prep. That definitely turns the odds in your favor for these fights. So even though you can prepare and really sway it in your favor, That doesn't mean the boss fights aren't still fun. They're all well animated, the music's really upbeat, and they're really cool. Some of the standout ones, I remember the second boss fight from Rockstar, particularly as a kid. I had a lot of trouble against this guy. The first part of this fight is just endurance. You're just avoiding the attacks that these things throw at you. But once you get to the top of this elevator, now you can turn the tide. This is also one of the only boss fights that actually kind of rewards you for not bringing a copy ability into it, because if you spit these projectiles back at the right color of enemy, it'll do bonus damage and end the fight a lot quicker. It's pretty cool. Some other standout boss fights are this killer whale thing you fight on Aquastar. There's a giant robot that transforms on Shiverstar. They're all pretty great. The last boss fight, though, is one that's worth a deeper study. The last boss on Ripplestar, which is the last normal level of the game, is Miracle Matter. Miracle Matter works a lot different than the other bosses in this game do. For any other encounter, you can bring in whatever copy ability you want, and you'll deal damage. Some are more effective than others, and just in terms of how they deal damage, but everything is effective. Miracle Matter, it's a lot different. It's a shape-shifting boss. He turns into the same kind of copy abilities that you've been using throughout the whole game. Cutter, needle, fire, electric, bomb, ice, and will use attacks against you with those elements. You can only hurt him with the exact type of element that he's currently in the form of. So when he's electric, he can only be hurt by his own electric attacks. That makes the boss fight a lot more challenging, because you can't just rely on the same ability non-stop. You have to be able to react and change and make quick decisions, because it's also really easy to kind of fumble yourself and fall prey to these attacks as you're attempting to inhale them for yourself. It's a very cool boss fight. It's definitely my favorite in the whole game. Probably one of my favorites from the whole franchise, to be honest. And his music is also pretty awesome. It starts off, just listen to it. That just like sets the mood, like, oh, this is a different fight than the other ones are. Oh man, it just gets you into it. I like it a lot. But let's take them on. Let's finish this. In order to defeat Miracle Matter, every single one of his multiple forms has to be disabled. To do that, each one of them needs to take 3 hits worth of damage. Easier than it sounds. Some of the forms are far easier to deal with than others. Fire is probably the easiest. Second easiest, I'd say, is probably Cutter. But some of them, it's really hard to get a hit in. In particular, Electric and Bomb. The Electric one is probably the most difficult one. Before you can retaliate, Miracle Matter will send these projectiles around the screen. They actually travel off screen and then re-enter from the opposite side. And there's so many that it's hard to keep track of where they're going to come in and out of, and that caused a lot of problems for me personally. The bomb one's also difficult because he spawns a number of projectiles that split before you can take advantage and fight back. So these two were the ones I always struggled with the most. The rest aren't that hard to deal with once you kind of figure out the patterns to look for. But as each one is hit 3 times, it'll be disabled. Getting close now. Getting close. Oh boy. Fire truck. Well, I didn't expect to beat it the first time. Still getting in the swing of things. Round 2. Bring it on. Ready for more. This is the one. I have it in my control. The last ability is fire. All I gotta do is get the... I can't even blame anybody but myself for that one. That's just me. Try it again. No! It's coming down to the wire. Okay, this is the one. I can already feel it, that this is the one. Oh! Came at me from behind. Man, that electric one is the most dangerous. It is, they just clear the screen, they come off, they come back, they come around, and then they just get you. Okay. Try it again. The last one is stone. I got you this time. I got you this time. Ho-ho! Did it! One hit, one hit. That came down to the wire. It always came down to the wire. Oh my gosh. I never have a clean run with this thing. But there we go. Miracle Matter defeated. Final boss crystal obtained. Here's our ending. Everyone's celebrating, having a good time. The darkness is sent packing to run away into space. Probably to go infect some other planet. We're just like pushing the problem away. We didn't actually solve the problem. But here we go. Everyone's happy, having a good time. Friends are saying goodbye. What was that look for? Evil look. So when I was a kid, I thought that that little glare was like she was jealous that she didn't save the day or something. Or she was like, man, those idiots solved the problem. Oh, give me a break. But now as an adult, when I see it, I'm like, oh, the game is telling me that not all is right with the universe. So that was the bad ending, I guess, if you want to label it as such. To get the best ending, we're gonna have to collect every single crystal shard in every level and then fight Miracle Matter again. Oh joy. So let's buckle down and get 100%. I mean, how hard could it be? Here we go. And done. 100%. I am the king. Let's take on Miracle Matter one more time. After getting all the crystal shards and fighting Miracle Matter, we now get the true ending. Obviously, spoilers for what comes ahead here, because we're going into the real ending plus the final boss. The darkness is expunged from the planet and blows up in orbit, very different from the other ending where it just ran away. But that's not all. The now reforged crystal actually expels darkness from the fairy leader. She was possessed the whole time. This thing doesn't go away though. It starts to grow, prompting Kirby to call the Warp Star, and this initiates the true final battle. So now here we are at the very end. We have to go through a short little course here, avoid a couple of basic enemies, all your friends wish you luck upon the way, and then you get launched into the final battle. And here's the final boss. Whoa, there is a lot going on with this thing. His name is 02. Why is it 02 and not just 0? Well, this guy was also the final boss of Kirby's Dream Land 3. So Kirby and the Crystal Shards is like a sequel to that. And just like Kirby 64, to even fight him in Kirby's Dream Land 3, you'd have to get 100%, which I never have gotten that. But I do have some footage of him from the beginning of the game, at least. Very similar looking stuff happening here, right? But the thing about 02 is, man, like his design is just all over the place. It's like 5 different people came together and they all had their own ideas for a final boss. And it's like, mine's an angel. Mine's a thorned snake. Mine's a Satan with a bleeding eye. Mine's a ghost from Mario Bros. Which one do you want, sir? Yes. And there you go. They all got in. It's like, look at this thing. He has like a bandit on his head too. I guess that's from losing his fight in the original game that he appeared in. But fighting him, pretty easy fight, not gonna lie. You just shoot pew pew into his eye. That prompts him to lean forward and you can shoot the halo band-aid, and then he flies backward and you can shoot his tail, which is the true weak spot. You'd think it'd be his cranium where the band-aid is, but it's his tail. So you shoot it, it really only takes like 2 phases, and you could take him down, and then kaboom! He viciously explodes, and Kirby is the winner. We then find ourselves in like a kind of Star Wars / Star Fox-esque ceremony sequence. All of our characters are getting medals of honor for their brave deeds. Kirby gets a little peck on the cheek and he collapses and everyone's like, oh, he's embarrassing us again. And the game is finally over. Well, that wraps up Kirby 64. That game held up a lot better than I ever thought it would. Despite its shortcomings, literal shortcomings, it is a very short game. Probably like 2 to 4 hours worth of content, depending on your pace. I have seen people beat it in barely an hour and a half, though. And the simple manner in which the copy abilities work. But despite those flaws, it still holds up really well thanks to its charm, its great level design, its very catchy music, fun boss fights. Although Miracle Matter was a lot tougher than I remember him being. That's more in line with my memories as a kid, though. I was always terrified of that fight. But man, holds up really well, super fun. If you're a Kirby fan and you haven't played it yet, check it out. It's a great game. And if you're just a casual Nintendo fan looking for something new to explore, I still recommend it. You're gonna have a good time with it. It's fun. It's very easy to get into. So Kirby 64 held up very well. Next time, not sure yet. I'm sure something will present itself. But I'll see you guys when that time comes.